Morning from Arusha, good morning from where you are, and good evening wherever you're joining us. My name is Praise God Joseph, and I work with Pan African Lawyers Union. And first, most, I would like to thank everyone for joining this webinar. Our aim is to ensure that we have an engaging discussion and key recommendations that we can take forward. And before we start the webinar, I would like to first invite our chair of the ICT panel committee, Mr. Salita, to give us the welcome remarks. Welcome, Mr. Salita. Sorry, you're still muted, Mr. Salita.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Praise God. I'm really honored to deliver these introductory remarks as chair of the committee, Pan-African Lawyers Union, CPESA policymakers, members of civil society present, the representatives, and persons with disabilities, and members of academia, and all participants. I welcome you to this very, very important webinar on a very important topic, and it couldn't be more timely than this date. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to this high-level webinar on the topic advancing gender-responsive, disability-inclusive AI governance in Africa. It's a very long name, and a lot of thought process has gone into coming up with this topic. I thank Palu and Sipesa for convening this important dialogue. It's a dialogue because it's a place where we actually exchange ideas. AI, artificial intelligence, commonly acronym AI, is here to stay. It's shaping the way our societies function. It influences everything we do or into this world. It influences economic activities, public administration, access to services, and increasingly it will influence the way decisions are made. Perhaps it may not be so apparent in our part of the world, but it's actually how it's going to be. The issue before us really is not whether AI will affect African society. It's a question of how, and it already does. And as Africans, we have to think of how do we address it? How do we deal with it? How do we choose how AI governs us or influences our society and our way of life and our way of work and how we interact? This AI governance is still new, even in the Western and more developed societies, and talk of Africa. So it's very important that we actually look at the peculiarities of our environment and make sure that the governance frameworks are something that we own, and that they look at. We make sure that these systems that we develop to govern AI does not mirror the existing inequalities present in our societies from which we emerge. Governance frameworks are rarely neutral in their impact. For that reason, it is very important that we're intentional about safeguards, about algorithm systems that don't actually reinforce existing disparities, which are structural and particularly affecting women and persons with disabilities and other historically marginalized groups. For Africa, this presents both a challenge and an opportunity, a challenge that is surmountable. We don't have to go back, we can leapfrog, we can be leaders in this. The challenge lies really in ensuring that emerging AI governance frameworks do not simply replicate models developed elsewhere without sufficient regard to our African realities and peculiarities. The opportunity really lies in designing governance systems that are inclusive by design and grounded in the continent's commitments to dignity, equality, and social justice. A gender-responsive and disability-inclusive approach to AI governance should therefore be seen as a matter of sound policy and responsible regulation in Africa. It requires us to pay attention to issues such as representation in data systems, accessibility in technological designs, and safeguards against algorithm bias, and ensure that so that we can ensure meaningful participation of communities in the government in the governance processes, particularly women and persons less disabled. I'm glad that we will have an exciting panel of experts who will now have a meaningful discourse and exchange ideas, and I also hope we'll have takeaways that will inform policy in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tao. And just for housekeeping, I'd like everyone to know that we have interpretation. You'll see in the lower buttons, there's one that is written interpretation. You can either speak English or French. Without further ado, I'll welcome Ms. Memabasi as our moderator for this webinar to take the floor. Welcome, Ms. Memabasi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am very please can you confirm that you can hear me? Hello, can you confirm you can hear me, please?
Your internet is not very well, but yes, maybe you can switch off your video.
Can you hear me? I count it a great privilege to moderate this panel discussion, seeing how useful it is for our day and age. As was said earlier by Mr. Tao, he said that the question is no longer whether AI would affect us. The question is agents affect us, right? And so we are going to kickstart this panel, which is titled Advancing Gender Responsive Disability Inclusive AI Governance in Africa, by quickly introducing our speakers. And then our lead speaker for today is Mr. Paul Kimumwe. After that, subsequently, we are going to have a panel discussion by Mr. Wilson Makaria, as well as Miss Alette Mwamini. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name properly. So please help me welcome Mr. Paul Kimumwe. But before we do that, I want to just give a brief introduction of Mr. Paul Kimumwe. He is the Senior Program Officer for Research and Advocacy and Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. In collaboration with Patrick Mutahi, he wrote a book titled Media and the Law in Djibouti, as well as Media Regulation and Practice in Uganda, a journalist handbook. So, sir, we count it an honor, and we know that you are very well equipped to speak to us about advancing gender responsive disability inclusive AI governance in Africa, seeing that you have in fact authored more than one book about this and you have made several policies in this regard. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mema Basi, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. As she said, my name is Paul Chimuma. I work with the SPESA, and yeah, I think I'm an aspiring expert, but I prefer to describe myself as a life learner of some of these issues because technology keeps changing, interests keep changing, experts keep changing. So as somebody who is interested in this space, it is always an honor to be able to participate and share some knowledge and some discussion, but also learn from colleagues in these spaces because the issues of technology, issues of governance, issues of inclusivity, and issues of human rights in general need a collaborative approach. First of all, we need to understand the issues that we are dealing with. We need to understand the players. We need to understand the decision makers we are working with, and also the interests of the people who are affected by these technologies in order for us to make sure that, one, the governance systems and structures that we develop are robust enough, but also they are responsive in terms of being inclusive, being human-centered, but also make sure that they are sustainable and not just for us to be ticking a box. And so before I dive into the critical issues and emerging risks of artificial intelligence, I wanted us to, first of all, do a refresh of the artificial intelligence ecosystem. Because over the last couple of years, we have seen so many efforts towards developing regulatory systems, mechanisms to try and manage and regulate how AI systems are developed and implemented in Africa, particularly. There has been a lot of worry that most of these systems are developed in the West by white men and the technological companies and just imported and dumped onto the continent, which causes a lot of consternations because many of us in Africa do not understand how these systems work. We are very excited to enjoy the benefits, but at the same time, we don't understand the key inherent risks involved in these systems. Now, a brief background. Artificial intelligence, the history of artificial intelligence can be traced towards the 1950s. But for most of us, especially the Gen Zs, the millennials, and those who are new to technology, we only got excited when in the early 2000s, when OpenAI is introduced the ChatGPT, and there were a lot of excitement. But through the 1990s and 2000, as technology developed and there was an increase in the availability of training data, AI improved. I think for you who are seniors, you remember Google search engine. These engines operated in a framework whereby they had been fed certain kind of data, and when you put in a search question or query, they were able to predict some of the answers and give you some responses. Now, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of improvement in technological development, but also availability of data that these machines are used to train so that they can be more precise in their predictions. And now the biggest worry is that what kind of data is being used to train these machines and what kind of responses are they giving and how responsive and how inclusive are these responses? What risks and the challenges do they pose, especially those who are excluded from the entire ecosystem? Yeah, but briefly, let me just try to analyze and share the understanding of the artificial intelligence ecosystem. How does it operate? Because if we understand that, it will be a bit easier for us to try and say, okay, if we are developing governance structures, governance systems, at what point of the interface, at what point of the iterations do we focus on? So there are about 3 stages, which are iterative in a way, they are not linear. So number one is that AI tools, they require training data. And so this could be text, this could be research reports, this could be images or any kind of information that is fed onto these machines so that they are able to be trained. Now, if once the data is acquired, it is cleaned. And those of you who are doing research, either quantitative or qualitative, you know how data cleaning processes take place. So that if you go into a field, collect your kind of data, before you try to analyze it, you need to clean it because there could be duplicates, there could be wrong information, there could be information that you do not need to analyze. And so there are quick questions along this particular chain. So what kind of data is being collected and fed into these systems for them to be trained on? Number 2, if the data is secured, who is in charge of cleaning this data? And what data is being cleaned in and also cleaned out? These are questions that I was to think through as we try to focus and debate these particular issues. Then number 3, AI systems use machine learning algorithms. Now, these are algorithms. I don't want to belabor some of these technology terms, but they are used to look for patterns in the data that is being fed into the systems. Again, those of you who are doing research, there are different tools that help you to understand what kind of patterns is the information giving you so that you can be able to interpret. Now, modern AI systems, especially the large language models, they use some special tools which are called transformers. Now, they help the AI under images, the text, so that you as a user, when you put in a prompt, they are able to predict certain kind of information to respond to your query. Number 5, the AI tools are also trained on data. So there are 2 types. One, they feed into a lot of large text, large information of data. So the AI systems absorb this kind of information. And then they are able to understand, depending on the type of training, to predict certain information. But also with time, because they are tested, there is also fine-tuning the kind of responses, because if you have too much data, then you can hallucinate. So the people who are training these kind of systems are able to keep on fine-tuning depending on the feedback and predictions that they, or prompts they get from the users. Now, the other iteration is about the nature and the capacity of the computer systems that are required to make sure that these AI machines can be operated. Now, these are very large systems, very huge systems, and they are very complex. So they require a lot of power, they require a lot of energy, they require a lot of computers to be able to operate. The key question that I want us to keep reflecting on is in Africa, do we have these systems? If we are to regulate, how do we make sure that we have the capacity, we have the finances to acquire these systems where our data can be stored? I think there is a debate around data centers. Where are they stored? How do they function? And their question is about the environmental impact of the data centers where they are situated. Number 7 is probably the deployment. Once the AI systems have been trained, then they are deployed. So now for us, you get to see ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and you are able to use them as you want. Of course, there are those that are free, open source, and then premium. So depending on your capacity and also interest, you can choose and pick what you want to get. And so when they are deployed, we are able to probably put in our prompts. Of course, they are around the ethical issues and issues of authenticity, issues of honesty, depending on the premium that you have. Because Copilot, you can give a prompt and it gives you a whole essay. Universities are struggling right now with the students because they are no longer reading and they're just putting everything into Copilot and they generate an essay. So there are issues around how are these AI systems being deployed. After that, of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is an iterative processes. So the people in charge of these large language models, AI systems, keep on refining. So they monitor once they release one system of AI. Of course, now I think most of us know that there are different versions of ChatGPT, and also even Copilot and also Gemini. So at every stage they get feedback and then they improve on the efficiency and the accuracy. And so there is a lot of monitoring and improvement. Again, for us in Africa, the questions we'll be asking ourselves are about maybe 3 or 4. One, what data are these machines trained on? And whose data is it? What's the quality of this kind of data that is being used to train these machines? Number 2, who is cleaning the data? Who is training the machines on this data? And who is controlling the training processes and algorithms? Then number 4, where is the training taking place? And where is the data being stored? And maybe number 5 are the issues that we want to focus on right now. Is who is in charge of this entire process of the AI systems as the data is being secured, the data is being cleaned, the data is being trained, the machines are being deployed, but also the monitoring and evaluation of their performance. These are critical questions that we need to keep on reflecting on, because if we do not understand at what point of the system, at what point of the iteration is more critical, then it doesn't matter how robust our laws are, because maybe what's the point of intervention, especially if to ensure that the data and AI systems are robust enough, they are inclusive, but also they are responsive to the Africa's needs. And so there are emerging issues based on these processes. Number 1 is that AI systems often reinforce existing gender biases. If you go back to the issue I mentioned about the data, because these AI machines are trained on the data. So how gender inclusive or how disability inclusive is the data that is being used to train these machines? If it is not, then they are most likely going to perpetuate and reinforce the existing gender biases. And if you look at the research coming out of Africa, how much of it is qualitative, how much of it is quantitative, how much of it is disaggregated to the extent that we know the different kind of gender, their roles, and how these groups of people interact with and interface with technology. If you look at issues of disability, how much data is available that is disaggregated enough for the machines to use them for training. And so there are issues of data quality. There are issues of data quantity coming out of Africa, because many of these machines, as I mentioned, they are trained on based on the data. So if our data coming out of the continent is poor quality, is not robust enough, is also gender biased, is also disability unfriendly, then we are most likely going to get outputs or prompts from these AI tools that is reflecting and perpetuating these particular biases. Then if we move to the second iteration where data is cleaned, if again our data is very dirty, it is not representative, it will be cleaned out so that the final data that is fed into these machines is not responsive enough. And that again will cause challenges for us if we are legislating around the issues of data quality, if we are legislating around issues of AI. Then number two, about the implications especially, is that biased and unresponsive data sets amplify inequalities. Again, if you look at the kind of data that we are generating as a continent, it is so biased that it does not promote inequality. And again, this is the data that is being used to be fed quality inputs or responsive inputs or outputs that promote equality, because what feeding these machines is not responsive enough. Many years ago, when we were learning computers, they used to tell us that garbage in, garbage out. So if the machines are being fed on data that is not responsive, that is biased, it means that in terms of response or outcomes from their prompts, the data will also be perpetuating these particular inequalities and gender biases. Then number three, we are looking at the underrepresentation in AI development, and which reinforces structural inequalities. As I mentioned, there are people, there are individuals and companies that are controlling these particular processes, the gathering of data, the cleaning of data, and the training of these AI machines and tools. So where are Africans in this particular process? What is our role, and at what point are we considered to be useful in this particular process? Are we providing the data? Are we collecting the data? And are we participating at any part in the training of these machines? Most likely no. And if we are probably on the periphery. So we are not on the table that is making decisions on how these AI systems and machines are developed, because we are not providing the data, we are not participating in the cleaning. So we do not make any decision around how this data is cleaned and what is eventually fed into the AI systems. And even when it comes to monitoring and evaluation on the performance of these particular machines and systems, we are not anywhere present. And so whose voices, whose views are represented in all these systems? It means, again, Africa as a continent, we are left behind, women are left behind, people with disabilities are left behind, and all groups that are vulnerable are left behind. And so to build onto these structural inequalities, especially to divide, and they shape who is benefiting. Because if your voices are not represented in these systems, in these spaces, then you are less likely to be able to achieve anything, because you are not anywhere on the table of decision makers. And so we have seen a lot of movement in terms of legislation. I think what I'm not sure is either we are being responsive, we are being reactive, or we are just now ready because everybody is passing a legislation around AI, so we should also be following suit. And I think these are questions that have been asked in different forums, and I am glad that even this one we are trying to soak it. If laws are being passed, if laws are being regulated, if laws are being enacted, how can we make sure that women, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups are represented in these particular processes? So, not many years ago, 2024, the African Union passed that a continental policy on AI, and we have seen several countries across the continent, Kenya, Rwanda, Egypt, Ghana, they have all come up with some kind of policies and strategic legal frameworks to ensure that the AI systems that are developed on the continent, or those that are imported on the continent, are rights respecting, but also the needs of the Africans as it were. But what we need to know is that, as Mr. Saliu mentioned, data governance itself is not neutral. And also this applies to technology. Technology has never been neutral. It is us to make sure that whatever we do with it, it becomes neutral, it becomes responsive, and it becomes empowering and fits into the needs of the continent. And so as we dialogue and probably make sense of these particular systems, where do we want to go from here? Now that we understand the iterative process of the AI ecosystems, at what point of the system do we try to intervene? Because we cannot legislate on each and everything, especially from the start. Yes, we can have broad laws, we can have broad legislation and the architecture governance, but we need to be very strategic, especially given our challenges as a continent. If we are not producing enough data, but these systems are working and being developed on data, so how do we regulate how data is channeled and transported or stored, especially about Africans, that these systems can be trained on? And how do we participate? How do we legislate and make sure that whenever the training is taking place, Africa is represented? If the monitoring and evaluation is taking place, that Africa is represented. We need to make sure that our laws are robust enough that they take into consideration all these dynamics. Because if we do not, then we are going to continue having different challenges, because we are going to legislate for one part, but then when it comes to implementation, we do not have the capacity. Look at the issue of data centers. We might want to have data centers located in Africa, but the question is, do we have the capacity to run these data centers? They consume a lot of water, they consume a lot of energy. Do we produce enough power? Do we have enough water to sustain this particular data centers? So these are questions that we need to be discussing and asking ourselves, okay, if we want AI systems to be trained on data from Africa, do we have provisions, legal provisions that ensure that the process of producing this data facilitates the production of data that is not biased? Or if we discuss and say we need pass legislation that make sure that the data that is passed onto these systems and training and companies, in terms of if you are fostering collaboration, that African voices are represented and they are heard. But also if we are doing trainings, we make sure that we have the capacity. Our universities have the capacity, our training institutions have the capacity, our technologists have the capacity to participate in these conversations as equals, but not just on the periphery. And I think, Babasi, for now, I want to stop from there, but my parting shot is that we need to understand the ecosystem of the AI so that we know the different levels at which decisions are made, so that if we are to legislate and to ensure meaningful participation, we know where to stand, and also to avoid or to mitigate some of the challenges and risks that come with AI systems, especially as they're developed and most often dumped onto the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your valuable contributions. I have learned so much. I learned, for example, from what you said, that the data that is contributed is oftentimes biased. There is dirty data. This data is insufficient from Africa. And because this data is insufficient and biased, the output would necessarily be biased as well. And then I also learned that the machines to generate this data require a lot of energy, require a lot of water. And unfortunately, these are things that we are struggling with in Nigeria. We are struggling with problems of water. We are struggling with not just Nigerians, but also Africa. We are struggling with problems of water, of energy. And such affecting the input and the quality of data. Thank you so much, Mr. Paul. Thank you once again. Next, we are happy to welcome Mr. Wilson Makaria. Mr. Wilson Makaria has a formidable legal profile. While I was researching, I discovered that in the case of Wilson Makaria and Safaricom PLC, the petitioner, who is our speaker for today, won a case in the court against the respondent for unfairly revocation of a job due to visual impairment. As such, you can see that there is no one better to speak on this matter than our speaker, who has already won a victory in the law court. You know, when I was reading his profile and I looked through the case facts, I thought immediately of what Neil Armstrong said when he became the first person to set foot on the
I think we have lost Miss Member Basti. With that note, I would welcome Mr. Wilson to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from. Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. So I'm going to be focusing my presentation on the experiences that persons with disabilities have in interacting with artificial intelligence. But as a background, I am a lawyer based in Kenya, working with the International Commission of Jurists, Africa program as a legal advisor. I'm also a person with disability. I'm blind, in other terms, visually impaired. And therefore, some of the experiences that we speak to today might also be informed by lived experiences by myself, but also people that I work with, engage with, and have had opportunities to interact with. There's a saying that's perhaps not very popular, that for persons without disabilities, technology makes things easier. But for persons with disabilities, technology makes things possible. Part of the reason why I find this quote to be very powerful is because there are some barriers that persons with disabilities have faced in society in the past and traditionally that technology came to resolve. And I think one of the things that we often say is that technology brings products and services closer to the people. But we also face one significant challenge or issue, that some of the barriers that make it difficult for persons with disabilities to participate meaningfully in society were mainly due to biases, perhaps sometimes even negative attitudes by society, or even beliefs that persons with disabilities were not capable, deserving of charity, etc., etc. And for a long time, the advocacy in this respect has been towards changing or shifting that perspective from simply a medical perspective, where you've seen persons with disabilities are viewed as people who corrected or treated, or charity perspectives that see or view persons with disabilities as persons who only need to be helped and assisted by means. And now to where persons with disabilities are viewed as equal rights holders, so with the capacity to hold rights and these rights. And this model, social model of disability, also led to a paradigm shift on how persons with disabilities or disability generally is understood. So the model, the medical model and the charity model viewed disability as being within the individual or the person. So for instance, if I'm blind, then the reason I cannot participate would be said is because I cannot see like everyone else can see. But now the social model, which is also based on the human rights model, views persons with disabilities as individuals who have impairments, right? But the disability arises from the barriers or the challenges. It could be physical, infrastructural, or attitudinal barriers that make it difficult for persons with disabilities to exercise their rights. I thought that background would be very important. Now, how does this relate to artificial intelligence and in general technology? So I started by saying that technology and including artificial intelligence has been viewed as bringing services, products, and systems closer to the people. But where these systems are designed without considering the views, the perspectives, and the experiences of persons with disabilities, then they bring the barriers, the challenges closer to persons with disabilities. So the infrastructural barrier that I would previously face when trying to access a physical building or infrastructure or reading a print material has now been brought to me closer to my home, to my office, through the devices that I use. The first question I'd want to respond, or for us to have in mind, and I would attempt responding to it in this session, is artificial intelligence disability. It is. In most cases, persons with disabilities, depending on the impairment that they have, because they are not a homogeneous group, require some form of accommodation or assistance or support to participate fully and effectively, right? So technology made it possible for persons with disabilities not to solely rely on human support, even though sometimes it's one of the crucial support that they would require. Has for use the devices that they have around them, the tools and the softwares that they have around them, to exercise independence, right, and participate meaningfully in society. And by the way, when I say, we also understand that from the African context, the African Charter and other instruments also consider persons with disabilities as duty holders. So in addition to holding rights, there are also duties that we need to fulfill in the society. As a personal experience, I'll give an example of one application that I really love using. The application is called Be My Eyes. And I invite you, in fact, I interest you that after this session, just go to your App Store, Play Store, and try to download this application. The beauty about this application, Be My Eyes, is that it connects persons with visual impairment to persons who are sighted for purposes of providing sighted guidance. So for instance, I would sign up, and I have signed up to the application as a person who's blind, and someone who's not blind could then sign up to the application as a volunteer to support people who are blind, so that when I'm in an environment that I need sighted assistance and I'm by myself, I can make a quick call on that application, and a volunteer would receive that prompt and be able to guide me using the video on their device. Now, utilizing artificial intelligence, this application has been updated to now being called Being My AI, right? Be My Artificial Intelligence. And the innovation that is within this application is that previously the volunteers were only human based. So you would need to make a call. Sometimes it would take 3 minutes, 30 seconds, or even 5 minutes to get a volunteer. But now the first call or the first level of assistance you're likely to get is from an artificial intelligence system, which makes it easier to access that support, because within microseconds or seconds, depending on how strong your data is, then you're able to access that assistance. This is just an example which is given by a person, one individual who's blind and has access to these devices. Now, AI has had impact to people with other types of disabilities as well. And as I said, we are not a homogeneous group. So you might see, or you might have experienced speech recognition devices or systems, which would caption information that, for instance, is being provided on a webinar like this for someone who's deaf or who cannot hear to be able to follow up the meeting, right? We also have applications or systems that assist persons with cognitive disabilities to undertake their daily tasks, right? We have mobility devices which are powered by artificial intelligence, and then can easily be manipulated by persons with physical disabilities, and so on and so on and so forth. And one of the systems that I love, especially when I'm traveling to environments that I'm not used to, is systems that sometimes try to map routes or infrastructure that is accessible for persons with disabilities, to mean that you do not only go to an environment that is not inaccessible. This application shows you that perhaps it would be better to use this alternative route. Otherwise, your wheelchair will not be able to, you won't be able to navigate using your wheelchair. But there are some challenges that arise. Some of these challenges, for instance, and this is very related to what the previous speaker, Paul, was talking about, how the data sets that inform the algorithms that are used by AI are created, and who is involved in creating these data sets. I'll give another lived, sometimes I like putting flesh and blood into the discourse so that you see how these influences lived experience directly. I see many companies, private institutions, sometimes private financial institutions, which use artificial intelligence in providing their services, sometimes from the point of even creating or opening a bank account. And one of the systems that I often face a challenge with is when it requires to take information or capture my face, or not take a picture, or for purposes of the biometrics. In most cases, when I try to do it by myself, and I try as much as possible to have a clear background, even though I cannot ascertain that my background, the wall behind me is clear all the time, to try face the camera just as the prompts on the application require. But being blind, then I might not have control over all these things, right? And therefore, you find that when I get to that stage, which is usually one of the final but also very critical stages, the creation of the profile fails. Why? Because this system and the data set has been informed to only work for people who look a certain way or manipulate their eyes a certain way, people who hear a certain way, people who are formed a certain way, or people who speak in a certain way. We also have artificial intelligence tools, for instance, those designed for persons who are deaf or persons who have hearing, that support the use of sign language. So for instance, there's a sign language glove that is often used to provide interpretation where there's no human sign language interpreter. But you find that these systems, for instance, eliminate or leave out very crucial components in this respect. So for instance, sign language is not only based on the signs that you use on your hands or your fingers. They have, the facial expressions have a significant bearing, and sometimes how you manipulate your body when interpreting. And I know there's an interpreter in this room, so perhaps that would also sometimes show, or I don't know, I hope that there is, that this glove, which only has 5 fingers or 10 fingers, cannot do or cannot manipulate. And therefore, it means that a person who's deaf, who's using that system, which has been applied by a certain duty bearer, might not be able to follow through in that information, even though the belief is that this is sign language, then it works for them. Then sign language is, as a language, also happens differently. So we call it the deaf culture. Kenyan Sign Language, for instance, is completely different from American Sign Language. And we could give the same examples for Tanzanian Sign Language, etc., in other countries in Africa as well. So this glove, or this system that is informed by artificial intelligence, could be using American Sign Language, But then the person who is meant to utilize or use it, or the person whom it is serving, does not speak that sign language, right? Just an example, experiences that persons with disabilities, and in this case, I've only given two examples, a person who's blind and a person who's deaf. But in general, what are some of these difficulties or challenges or gaps that arise in the use of artificial intelligence? As Paul said, there is bias and fairness concerns. And as I said, that they are designed, the data sets are informed for people who look a certain way, who talk, who walk a certain way. So you find that sometimes that the representation, the diverse ways in which persons with disability sometimes is not appreciated or is not in the data set that informs the AI systems. And what that results to is exclusion, discrimination, sometimes even indignity, because if you look a certain way, then that system a human. One time, and I was trying to enter my bio says that I need to visit a branch because the app has detected that a malicious software or system might be trying to manipulate the application, simply because I could not gaze, maintain eye contact, or face the right point of the phone. And then there's a lack of accessibility in the design and the development of AI systems, AI products, and AI-informed services. Accessibility in general sometimes is viewed as a very abstract thing, right? So when you go to an open environment with a certain number of people and ask, what do you understand by accessibility? They tell you it's a ramp stairs or a ramp where there are steps, etc. But it goes beyond that, and it applies to various spaces, including in the artificial intelligence systems, especially those which we use devices like computers or phone to access. As an example, persons with visual impairment use screen readers to access information that is on the computer. I'm using a screen reader today to access Zoom platform, to mute and unmute, etc., etc. But if the system, which science use not from a universal design perspective,
Wilson.
to mean that it's designed.
Mr.
Yes.
Wilson, thank you so much. But could you begin to wrap up our time? The time is up that was allotted to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll do that. So as I was saying that they are not designed with accessibility in mind, then it means that the persons who have disabilities or certain types of disabilities might not be able to use these systems. So as I wrap up, what are some of the recommendations or guidelines that we should have when designing or developing artificial intelligence? Also the governance framework, like the regulation. So for purposes of this, and to be brief, I'll just mention three. That it is important first to design and develop standards, guidelines, and legal frameworks that specifically recognize the requirement of inclusion of persons with disabilities and enhancing of accessibility of these systems. And sometimes it might require including these provisions on the universal or the mainstream standards, but also having some which are specific to persons with disabilities. And in doing this, it's also very important to ensure the meaningful participation of persons with disabilities in all these processes. Now, you cannot design a product, a system, or a tool meant to support persons with disabilities, but without taking into consideration their views. But also it is important for lawyers and lawyers who sit in decision influencing mechanisms, decision-making mechanisms, those who advise private entities and designers of artificial intelligence to ensure that the practices, policies that are being developed are inclusive, and where they are not, to support persons with disabilities with challenging these practices and policies. Thank you very much. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I have learned a lot, and I have thought to ensure that
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. I think our moderator has dropped out, technological issue. But I will welcome our next speaker. But before that, I want to say thank you so much for Mr. Wilson for the very insightful knowledge you have provided and lived practical experience where it has enabled us to understand the situation, understand how AI can not be inclusive and how we really need good governance and good framework to ensure that it is inclusive. And this is where the discussion will proceed. I'll welcome Ms. Arleta to give us now the experience on issues of gender equality. Welcome.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Presse-Gals. Mon intervention va se focaliser sur la situation actuelle en matière de gouvernance de l'IA ainsi que son cadre juridique. Je vais essayer de présenter les lois qui réglementent l'intelligence artificielle, après quoi je vais parler des rôles des juristes et d'autres auxiliaires de la justice ainsi que toutes les parties prenantes dans le renforcement des mesures de protection, des cadres réglementaires et des mécanismes de responsabilité afin de garantir un système d'intelligence artificielle plus inclusif et plus équitable en Afrique. Sinon, je réponds au nom de Arlette Kitumaini. OK. Je réponds au nom de Arlette Kitumaini. Je suis de la RDC et je suis avocate, mais aussi défenseur des droits humains et expert en genre. Je travaille présentement avec CORDS, Community Outreach for Resilience and Development. C'est une organisation basée à Goma et où je joue le rôle de secrétaire exécutif. Alors, sans plus tarder, passons directement au premier point. L'intelligence artificielle certainement, il est en train de transformer profondément nos sociétés et partout dans le monde, bien sûr. Les États cherchent à encadrer son développement par des lois et des politiques adaptées. Mais aussi la gouvernance de l'IA n'avance pas au même rythme, mais selon les régions chacune à sa réglementation, bien sûr. Et c'est ce décalage qui
is
mérite
slower
toute
than
notre
the
attention
pace
aujourd'hui.
at which
Alors,
artificial
pour ce qui
intelligence
est de la
is
réglementation,
rising,
je
and
vais
that
essayer
is
peut-être de
the
présenter
cause
la
of our
réglementation sur
intervention
le
today.
niveau
So I'll be talking
international,
about
le niveau
the
régional,
three
ainsi que
tiers
sur
of
le plan national.
instruments,
Alors, commençons par
international,
le niveau
regional, and national
international.
level. So to start with, At the international level,
la loi européenne sur
we have
l'intelligence
the European
artificielle.
law on in
C'est une
artificial
première
intelligence,
législation au monde
which
qui est
is
complète et contraignante en
the very
matière
first
d'intelligence artificielle.
complete and binding
C'est une loi qui a classé
instrument
les
on
systèmes
artificial
d'intelligence artificielle
intelligence.
selon
It has
leurs
ranked
degrés,
artificial
notamment les risques
intelligence
et
systems
risques
based
d'âge,
on the risk
qui
level,
sont les
have
interdits, par
unacceptable
exemple, de
risks, which
notation
are
sociale, mais aussi
forbidden,
l'intelligence artificielle manipulatrice. Il
such
y a
as
aussi des
manipulative
risques
artificial
élevés qui
intelligence
risquent
and
de se
social
développer
manipulations. We also
en
have
matière
artificial
de
intelligence
gouvernance des
that
données,
is subject
de
to
transparence
strict
et de
compliance
contrôle
with
humain.
governance,
Sur ce
data
point ici, nous
governance,
avons l'intelligence
exigencies and
artificielle dans le
transparency.
domaine de
At
la
this level,
santé, de
we have
l'éducation,
artificial
dans le domaine
intelligence
juridique,
devices
bien sûr
used in
dans l'application
education,
de la loi.
health, in the
Et aussi, il y a les
judiciary,
risques
and in
d'inégalité
law
générale
enforcement. We also
qui
have
exigent des
minimal
obligations de
risk
transparence
artificial
limitées,
intelligence, which is subject
notamment
to
des
alleged
chatbots
transparency
et
obligations. This
des
includes chatbots
applications
and
relatives.
other
En
associated
deuxième lieu,
applications.
après la loi
And
européenne sur
then after
l'intelligence
the
artificielle,
EU's uh,
nous avons la Convention
framework
cadre
law on
du Conseil
artificial
de
intelligence, we
l'Europe.
have the
C'est le
framework
premier
convention
traité
of the European
international
Council,
et
which is the
juridiquement
very first
contraignant
international
sur
treaty
l'intelligence
of a
artificielle.
legally binding
Il
nature
est axé
on
sur la
artificial
protection des droits de
intelligence.
l'homme, de
It
la
is hinged
démocratie
on
et
human
des
right
droits des
protection,
personnes.
democracy, and the
En
rule of
troisième
law.
lieu, nous avons
And
les
then
principes de
number
l'Organisation de
three, we
coopération et de
have
développement
the
économique
principles of the
sur
Organization
l'intelligence
for
artificielle.
Economic
Ce sont des
Cooperation and
principes
Development
qui ont
on
été mis en
artificial
place
intelligence.
en
These are
2019,
principles or
mais
rules that
elles
were
ont été mises à jour
established
en
in
2024.
2019
Ces
and they
normes,
were
ce sont
updated
des
in
normes intergouvernementales
2024. These are intergovernmental
devaient
laws
promouvoir
or rules
l'intelligence
which
artificielle
seek to
centrée sur
promote the use of
l'humain
artificial
et
intelligence, which
confidentielle.
is
Ce
human-centered
sont
and
des principes
trustworthy.
qui
These are
ont une forte
principles
influence
that
sur la loi
have
européenne. La
have
loi
had
européenne
great
sur
influence on the
la
EU
première loi
framework
que nous
law
avons
on
citée.
artificial
European law.
Et en
intelligence.
quatrième lieu, nous
And
avons les recommandations de
at the fourth
l'UNESCO
place,
sur
we have
l'éthique
the
de l'IA.
recommendations of UNESCO on
Ce sont des
ethics of
recommandations qui sont adoptées
artificial intelligence. These recommendations are adopted in many countries and provide access to ethical impact and principles.
ne pas nuire. Et en dernier lieu, donc, au
So
cinquième point, nous
the
avons
last point,
la
the
Charte
fifth one,
citoyenneté
is
mondiale
the
adoptée par l'ONU
the global
et
digital
elle est
impact
établie,
adopted by the
elle établit un
UN,
panel
and
scientifique
it
international sur l'intelligence
establishes a
artificielle
panel on
chargé
artificial intelligence
d'évaluer
in charge
les
of
risques.
evaluating
Alors,
or
sur le plan
assessing rather
continental,
the
nous
risks.
avons la
Regarding
stratégie
the
continentale
continental
de l'Union
level, we have
africaine
the
en matière
continental strategy
d'intelligence
of the African
artificielle
Union as
adoptée
far as
en juillet
AI is concerned, that was
2024.
adopted in
Cette stratégie constitue le
2024,
fondement du
and
cadre
this
juridique et
strategy is
politique
based on the
de l'intelligence
legal
artificielle en Afrique.
framework and the
Elle vise
policies
aussi à
regarding
unifier
AI in
l'approche
Africa.
des États
The
membres
goal
pour
is also
exploiter le
to unify
potentiel
the
de
approach of
l'intelligence
member states
artificielle
in
tout
order
en
to promote
atténuant
the
les risques
potential of artificial
sécuritaires et juridiques.
intelligence and promote
C'est une stratégie qui met
ethics.
en
It's a
avant des
strategy
objectifs ambitieux
putting
comme
forward
stimuler
strategic
l'innovation, renforcer la
ambitions
souveraineté
regarding
numérique et
digital
protéger les droits
sovereignty and
fondamentaux.
to
Mais
protect
l'intégration
fundamental
explicite de
rights. But
l'équité
the
et de
explicit
l'inclusion dans
integration
cette
of
stratégie reste
equity
encore
and
en voie
inclusion in
et
this
je crois que c'est
strategy
ce qui nous
is still
intéresse
at a very
dans le
basic
webinaire
phase,
d'aujourd'hui.
and that's what is
En d'autres
interesting
mots,
us
on parle
in
beaucoup de
this webinar.
compétitivité et
And
de
in other words,
développement
we
économique
mostly talk about
dans ces
opportunities and economic
recommandations, mais
development
trop
in
peu
the
la manière dont
regulations,
l'intelligence
but
artificielle doit servir les
the
femmes,
way
les personnes vivant avec
AI
handicap
should
et
serve
les communautés
women,
marginalisées.
physically challenged people, and
Alors, si nous allons plus loin
marginalized people
dans
is
les
really to be
législations
taken
nationales,
into account. And
il est à
regarding the
admettre que
national legislations,
des
we
progrès
should
notables ont
admit
été
that
réalisés jusqu'alors.
important
Parce
progress were
qu'aujourd'hui,
made
plus
till
de
date.
40
And
pays ont
today,
adopté des
more than
lois sur
40
la
countries
protection des
adopted
données et
laws
une
on
trentaine
data
disposent de
protection,
techniques
and
de contrôle
30
pour
other countries
surveiller
have
l'usage des technologies
uh,
numériques.
methods
Mais aussi, certains
assess
États ont déjà lancé
the
des stratégies
use of
nationales
data. Other states
d'intelligence
also
artificielle.
launched
À titre
some
d'exemple, nous
strategies
allons
regarding AI, and as an
citer
example,
la
we can
République
have
démocratique du
the
Congo
Democratic Republic of Congo
avec sa réforme de son plan
with its
national sur
reform and its national plan on the digital data. It's the National Plan 2026-2030. We also have the implementation of the national strategy of AI. We also have South Africa, who is one of the most important actors with a national project on AI. It's a project from 2024, and we also have the adoption rates that is increasing in the public sector. We also have Kenya, who launched its national strategy in terms of AI by using some initiatives to combine everything. We also have Egypt and Nigeria developing linguistic models, large framework linguistic model at the local level in order to guarantee AI and the participation of everyone. So we can also realize that these strategies are are promoting innovation, but also data sovereignty. Despite the fact that some digital developments offer benefits at the environmental and digital level, these initiatives are still to be updated, and the strategy is not implemented at the public sector, in the public sector. So we are mainly focusing on growth and innovation without providing sustainable mechanisms, especially for people for physically challenged people. So despite the fact that, these initiatives can increase stereotypes related to AI, and also it's a change that can deeply increase the digital divide. So these AI governance is still to be is still to be improved. And in Africa, we have the adoption of other models coming from outside that need to be adapted to African realities. So this should also take into account the ethical aspect. If we don't act that way, some real problems will occur. So we really need to take into account the pressure related to national regulations, OCDs, and UNESCO in order to guarantee that interoperability. So what is the impact of these exclusions? The fact that the gender dimension is not taken into account after regarding the governance of AI, and it increases the digital divide, the disparities. We also have the issue of the women representation in big positions, and no one is there to talk about issues. Women issues in Africa. This means that some laws are passed without the contribution of women. We also have the lack of accessibility, of digital accessibility, because many platforms and interfaces are not adapted and don't take into account women's problems. So these exclude women from the beginning, and we will realize that gender biases and structural discriminations are still present in our society, and this has an impact on the digital data. In other words, we can say that an AI that is shaped without including the gender aspect is an AI that discriminates And in addition to that, if you followed Mr. Paul when he was speaking, he insisted on the fact that AI systems strengthen the gender biases, and it's up to us to ask ourselves if women taken into account, and see how to reconsider all these tools if they are included in the data evaluation assessment. Are they really taken into account in the decision-making process? That's the reason why lawyers, legal persons, and policy makers in Africa should really focus on that aspect from the beginning, because AI should not only be something related to technology or economy. No, it's also a matter related to human rights. And for that to be possible, we should ask ourselves how lawyers, how legal persons, and how all the stakeholders can improve the protection measures and accountability mechanisms in order to improve these initiatives and make them more equitable. So how can we guarantee respect? We should ask to the legal person what to do in order to improve the gender dimension and to include it in the governance of AI in Africa. And we talked about business, we talked about how gender should be integrated or included in AI. At the national level, we try to explain how some strategies don't include the gender aspect. So regarding the some reports, 32% of women are using the internet connection. So it's a very low percentage. And it's true, there is a sort of progression, but this is also the result of the digital divide. And this result is not due to a lack of skill. No, it's based on the structural barriers and social barriers. We have, for example, cultural norms that enters into play. We have the limited access to, I mean, access to women in decision-making positions. And we also have gender-based violence, and this is strengthened by technology, and the participation of women and girls is also taken into account. We have protection measures and the integration of the gender aspect in the legal framework of AI, which is sine qua non for a transformative and inclusive governance of AI, and that should also include gender parity and take into account the needs of women and girls. This will also reduce the digital divide thanks to the access to information, the inclusion of women in the digital value chain. This will also reduce gender-based violence thanks to technology and a legal and institutional framework. We also have the creation of a gender observatory, a digital gender observatory for the participation of more women. And for that to be possible, the lawyers, legal persons, and all the stakeholders have a really important role to play in for the inclusion of gender in AI to be really possible. So we need to strengthen the protection measures for legal persons. They should reflect on the artificial intelligence. They should reflect on rules in order to protect fundamental rights. It means that we should integrate some clauses on gender equality, on the accessibility of women to some elements, and legal persons can also propose some amendments to the draft laws. They can participate in the fight for equity, for it to be included in the law. We should also have we should also improve the legal framework where the legal persons should better contribute in the shaping of the legal framework.
Cette stratégie doit aussi mettre en
This
place des
strategy
mécanismes
should
de
also
responsabilité
implement
où
some
il doit pas être
responsibility
considéré
mechanisms,
uniquement
and
comme
AI
des
at that
droits
level should
humains
not only be
sans
considered
responsables.
as
Les juristes doivent exiger des audits,
an
des audits des
independent
systèmes
or
d'IA.
yes, an independent
On doit
element.
savoir
No,
comment est-ce
we
qu'on
should
conserve les
know
données.
how
On doit imposer
data
des
are
obligations
stored.
de
We should impose
traçabilité et de garantir qu'il
the
existe
tracking of data
toujours
and
une
some
responsabilité humaine
guarantees,
derrière chaque
making
décision
and make sure that
automatisée.
there
Donc,
is
en bref, on peut
a
parler de la
tracking behind
redevabilité.
all the decisions
Alors,
that are made. So
après ça, il y a un autre défi à
in
relever.
addition to that, we have
Parce que bien
another
qu'il y a
challenge to
l'évolution de
overcome.
l'industrie juridique,
We know that
aujourd'hui,
AI
le
also
niveau
changes.
Please, can you begin
Oui.
to wrap up? Your time is up.
Yes.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Yes. Alors, les études et observations montrent
So
que
some
dans certains
studies
pays
show
africains,
that in some
moins
African
de
countries,
20% des avocats
less than
utilisent
20% of
des outils
lawyers use
d'IA dans leur
AI
pratique
tools
quotidienne.
in their day practices.
Les
And
applications comme la recherche juridique automatisée, l'analyse
applications
des
like
contrats ou la
the,
gestion
the
d'intelligence
analysis
des
of
dossiers,
contracts, the
elles sont
governance
encore
of
peu répandues.
data
La
are
plupart
not
d'avocats
really
continuent de
well
travailler
known,
avec des
and
méthodes
most
traditionnelles,
lawyers
parfois
still
par manque de
work in a
moyens,
traditional
parfois
way,
par
maybe
manque de
because of a
formation,
lack of
mais
means,
aussi
the lack of
parce
skills,
que
but
l'intelligence
also
artificielle
because when we talk
est
about
massifiée.
artificial
Alors la
intelligence,
question à se
we have a
poser
sort
c'est de
of
savoir comment un avocat
lack of
peut
knowledge.
défendre
So
l'inclusion
how a
et
lawyer can
l'équité dans
defend
de
inclusion
l'intelligence
and equity
artificielle
of
s'il ne
AI
maîtrise pas lui-même
if he
l'intelligence
doesn't
artificielle.
himself master or
Le risque
understand
est
AI?
que
So
un
the
avocat
risk
qui plaide
is
pour
that a
une
lawyer
gouvernance inclusive de l'IA,
pleading
mais
for
qui ne
more
comprend pas son
inclusion of
fonctionnement,
AI
risque
without
de manquer de
understanding its
crédibilité.
functioning
Puis encore,
can
il peut
not
involontairement renforcer
can
les stéréotypes et
be
les
not be taken
discriminations
seriously,
liées
and this
à
can
l'IA. Alors,
even
que faire? Il faut
increase
renforcer les formations,
discrimination
des
and the
séminaires,
digital
des
divide.
ateliers,
We
des
should
pratiques,
uh,
mais aussi des modules en
improve
ligne pour
or
renforcer la capacité
raise awareness
des
on
avocats et
or
s'assurer
maybe
qu'ils sont bien armés pour
build the capacities
défendre
of
des
the
rapports de
various
gouvernance de
stakeholders in order for
l'intelligence
them to be able
artificielle.
to
Parce
better
que pour que
defend
les avocats soient au cœur de l'action
the
pour une
governance of AI,
gouvernance
because for the
inclusive, il faut
lawyers to
d'abord
be at the
s'assurer qu'ils
center
maîtrisent cette
of the
technologie,
action,
car
they should
on ne
at
peut pas
least
défendre
master the
efficacement une cause
technology.
que
We
l'on ne connaît
cannot
pas.
fight for a
Former
cause
les
that we
avocats, c'est
don't
leur donner
master.
aussi les
So
armes nécessaires pour
training
transformer ces données
lawyers is
européennes
also
d'édition en
giving them the
numérique
tools, the
et d'une
necessary tools to
révolution de
operate that
justice équitable.
revolution for more
Sinon,
justice and
pour
equity.
conclure,
So to conclude,
je nous invite donc
I
tous en fait
invite
défenseurs des droits humains,
everyone,
des décideurs politiques à ne pas rester
all
spectateurs.
the
Soyons des architectes d'une gouvernance inclusive.
policymakers, to
Soyons là
be
pour plaider des lois qui
there
protègent,
and
attaquons les
promote
discriminations,
law.
formons-nous aux enjeux numériques et
Let's
surtout portons la voix des femmes,
build
des
our
personnes vivant avec
capacities
handicap
regarding
et de tous les groupes
uh,
marginalisés.
digital
Enfin, l'avenir de l'Afrique ne se
and
construira
the
pas
digital
seulement avec
aspect and
des
AI.
algorithmes, mais
And
avec des
AI
pratiques
is
de
not all
justice et
about, it's
d'équité.
not only about
Essayons ensemble de
algorithms.
garantir
So
que
it's
cette
up to us
révolution
to
numérique soit
operate
une
that
révolution
revolution
humaine
and to
au
make it
service
a
de tous.
success for
Sinon,
the good
je
of
dis merci
everyone.
beaucoup
So thank
et
you. Thank you
je vous
for
remets la
your kind
parole.
attention. I give you back the floor.
Thank you so much. I have learned a lot. For us to promote digital inclusion and for genders for females. We have to understand how it works in the first place. Thank you so much. So now we are going to welcome Madam Rachel Magege. She's a Tanzanian lawyer with expertise in data protection law, alternative dispute resolution, digital and tech law, and regional data governance in Africa. She has worked in project development and implementation in data governance. She has striven for improved data practices and governance, and we are very glad to have you here. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me and having me here in this very, very prestigious webinar. So as the last speaker, I do hope that you will still give me your attention, and I hope that you will learn from my short remarks, where I am going to be talking about different governance structures in a very practical way. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Salamawit, please let me know if you can hear me now. Thank you. Yes, so I am going to be speaking about governance structures and more practical, realistic approaches that we can take with regards to inclusive AI governance in all the different aspects of our lives. As introduced, my background is in the legal sector, but I am right now leading a company called the Tanzania Privacy Professionals Association. And we are a body issues that they have and what needs to be revised, what needs to be amended or improved. The African Union put out a continental AI strategy. Look into that and think about, is it realistic? Is it practical? Yes. And now to my final part of the conclusion, because I know a lot of time has gone by and you may have some questions and comments. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be very intentional about how we govern artificial intelligence. You will hear many times people say that we need to make a law, we need to draft a law, we need to improve and revise a law or a framework. And yes, that is very, very good. But I have said this before. Even though the framework is there and the law is there, and it has already been passed, it has already been given, the implementer, the executor, you have a duty to be very innovative and creative in how you implement this law to the groups of people that you are serving. Take this, for example. You have a law called the Clean Water Act. Yes, and I know there are different laws about clean water and hygiene, but go with me here. You have a law called the Clean Water Act, and it just talks about establishment of a Clean Water Commission, and these are the rights. Everyone deserves clean water, and all of that. Would you imagine a district commissioner going to his people or somewhere, or maybe he has to give a report and says, okay, but the Clean Water Act did not specifically mention access water, can use water, if the law continues to improve and to be revised. Are we happy when we see a law that specifically says women or mentions women or people with disabilities? Yes, we are. And we wish for more and more of that. However, with the laws and the policies that are already in place, one does not have to limit themselves in their thinking and in their implementation to not take a step forward in innovation and implementing to make sure that a specific AI law or a specific data protection law is protecting all the different people and all the different groups according to their needs and according to their different accessibility requirements. And so this is something that I push forward a lot, and I tell a lot of people. I speak to lawmakers many times, I speak to regulators and commissioners, and I really do encourage them about this, that you don't have to sit idle and just wait for a new law to be revised and amended. You can still start to implement and provide for the people that the law is supposed to protect. And another recommendation that I do make, something that is very practical, is to also make sure that intellectual property governance is very strong when it comes to matters of artificial intelligence, so that the creators, the people who bring forth different innovations and creations, are being recognized for the work that they do. It is also very, very important to make sure that we utilize research that already talks about specific groups. There is so much research out there that specifically talks about women, girls, women in finance, women in inheritance matters. It talks about people living with disabilities and how they innovate, how they perform agricultural duties. There is so much research. Imagine how wonderful and how innovative our implementation and our laws and frameworks would be had we sat down and collected all these different researches that had been done very diligently that address a specific area, for example, in gender, in women, in people living with disabilities, in children, in the elderly. So it's important to find this research. And should anybody need help, we can always support. I have seen a couple of research on my side that has specifically addressed women's issues, and it brings to light perspectives that you would never have thought of if you are not working in the women's space, or for someone who may not understand maybe women's experiences or children or people living with disabilities. Wilson has spoken so much about the experiences and the examples. He has given tangible examples for someone, for people living with disabilities. Those are the types of research publications that should be brought when lawmakers are in parliament drafting a law, when certain companies are creating an AI tool. And then last thing is to say that I will be sharing my LinkedIn profile here in the section for anybody who may want to reach out to me. And should you ever be in the Tanzanian space, please do reach out to me. We can continue to engage and meet. I'll be here for any more questions and comments. And thank you so much for being with me and staying with me. Thank you. Back to you, moderators.
Thank you so much for your insightful comments. I'm sure that everybody agrees with me that we've had a productive day. Thank you so much. There are 4 questions right now to be answered. The first one goes to Mr. Wilson, and then it's from a person called Edward Yaluma. I am currently thinking on how people with disability are protected in the issue of advancement of technology in the banking system, especially this so-called mobile banking, where mobile phones are linked with banking systems. How are people with disability protected with mobile banking? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to take a quick response at that while other panelists also come in. And so to answer that question, how are people with disabilities protected? Some practical ways that I have seen people do is that they train their AI models to recognize and to reduce bias, especially when it comes to different people with disabilities. And just because a lot of the data that is already being fed tends to be very biased. And it's biased because human beings are biased, and human beings are the ones creating and feeding artificial intelligence. And so it takes a team of some very intentional people to train this model, to feed it information that is expansive, so that it is very deliberate and it is very fair to how it gives services to other people, to different groups of people. And something else that I have seen is, for anyone who may have heard, Kenya has drafted a bill for artificial intelligence. Now, this is going to be an actual law, an act of parliament. And I was reading it, and one of their sections specifically mentions and hints that the way artificial intelligence is going to be governed in Kenya is that the commissioners or the team, the implementers, are going to make sure that artificial intelligence is not discriminating. It's not biased, and it's not ethical. Now, how do you do that practically? How do you do that step by step? It's going to take a lot of work. Obviously, that comes with feeding it with more right information, such as the research and the publications that I was talking about, that give a general perspective and a more truthful perspective for different people living in society. So if anybody would be interested in reading that bill from Kenya, that's something that I can share with you all. So that's just a small contribution from me. I see Wilson is also here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that great contribution. And maybe just to add to that, so sometimes we find that developers of applications of various systems in different sectors try to be overprotective of some groups, in this case, including persons with disabilities. And sometimes when we do that, we also take away the legal capacity of persons with disabilities, or we take away the autonomy of persons with disabilities and the capacity, the ability to access those systems. So my response to that question is banking systems specifically, or financial institutions should not reinvent the wheel or try to be overly protective of persons with disabilities to the extent that sometimes they also limit the exercise of their rights. We have instruments which would serve as good practices in this respect. We have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has specific mandates on accessibility and even requires the development of universal design standards to enhance accessibility. At our region, we have the Africa Disability Protocol, and various countries, like the examples we've gotten from Kenya, have also taken steps to ensure that there are some standards or guidelines that should be taken in place to ensure that persons with disabilities. The underlying principle would be first to consult with persons or individuals with disabilities when developing these systems. Second, to consider that persons with disabilities also have a right to access these financial institutions and financial systems. And also, thirdly, where the app or the system is not accessible, then they tailor-make arrangements or provide accommodations, individualized accommodation, to ensure that the person with disability can access this system and platform. And in most cases, you would be surprised that persons with disabilities also have the expertise or the knowledge on what specifically works for them, as opposed to what the institution might assume works for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your insightful contributions. So going forward, I think it might be wiser to ask all questions so you can answer within the time frame you have all the questions you possibly can answer. So the first question is with AI adaptation growing across the continent and as it relates to people with disabilities, and with neurodiversity recently gained traction, how can we ensure that AI addresses this as well? With AI adaptation growing across the continent as it relates to persons with disabilities, and with neurodiversity recently gaining traction, how do we ensure that AI addresses this as well? Then another question is this: how can we explain the number of women in the DRC is higher than that of men, but they do not participate in governance of AI, even though they could influence the elections of women to make them participate in this governance? In your opinion, what are the causes and how can we remedy this? Okay, and then finally, could you elaborate on the substance of the DRC 2026 to 2030 AI plan? What is this really about? And how is this plan supposed to work? Does it compete with the DRC digital code, or how? So these are the questions for the panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nevabasi. Maybe I can add two more questions, then start with Paul, then we can go with the other panelists. I'll read two more questions, then we can start with Paul. The other question that was asked was how can we effectively mitigate future risks caused by AI systems that lack gender sensitivity, especially in contexts where the widespread and often unwise use of social media is increasing the vulnerability of women and others at risk groups. And the other question, the last question is drawing from the experience, what are the practical steps should African policymakers take to make AI governance truly gender responsive and disability inclusive rather than treating inclusion as an afterthought? So I would welcome Paul, then the rest of the panelists can take on. Welcome, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, praise God, and all the other speakers. Very informative insights from everybody else, especially people who touched on the legal frameworks, how what we need to do, and the Machari, your experience and expertise on this subject is very commendable. I think I will not answer specific questions, but provide some more, again, insights on how these things need to be framed. I think there is a concept that Machari has touched on, that is universal design and multimodal principles. And I think these two concepts have been applied. Sometimes they are more associated within the built environment, but they also apply within the digital spectrum. For example, the universal design and multimodal principles require us, especially if you're designing a building, make sure that its accessibility and exploration is so that different people with different abilities are able to explore and interact with this building in ways that is very convenient for them, that they can choose to. So a building should have probably stairs, should have an escalator, and should have a ramp. So that even if I'm not a wheelchair user, I can choose to use a ramp because maybe I want to walk, or I can choose to use an escalator. So that you do not limit me to how I can choose to explore this particular building. And the other thing is we need to be very intentional and start from the inception of when we are designing some of these tools, some of these policies, so that we make sure that every user is catered for. So this requires us to examine and also find out how do people with disabilities, especially cognitive disabilities, people who are blind, people who are deaf, how do they explore technology? So that when you are designing a specific technology, we have their needs in mind. Unfortunately, this rarely happens. We first design an application and then deploy it. Then when we get feedback and maybe complaints, that's when we try to make adjustments, which becomes very costly and which becomes an inconvenience for the developer. But if you are very intentional that you're designing an application, the first question is to ask yourself, who are my users? How do they interact? How do they interface with my application? If it is a website, how are my users, especially people who are using screen readers, how will they interface and explore my product? Once you have those answers, it becomes easier for you to develop a website that has very clear color contrast, that has very clear alternative text, that also provides for auto captioning. This is because you were very intentional. You went to and researched and found out that, okay, people with screen reader users, people who use screen readers, this is how they will explore my website. So you don't develop a website first, and then you say, okay, people who are using screen readers, how are you going to explore it? You ask them, and you do what we call a usability testing or a user experience study, so that you find out what are the needs of these people, what are the needs, how do they explore my products. And I think it becomes very easier and becomes actually cheaper because you had, from the very beginning, you have taken care of the needs of every individual. And also, this is how the law works. I think Rachel spoke about engaging with policymakers, but we know how our legal systems works. We know how our policies are made. Most of the time, we are very reactive. So if we do not involve the technologists, but also understand the law we are, whose interest is this law protecting? What's the language of this particular law? But also, do we have the capacity to implement this law? For many of the countries, especially in the Commonwealth, before a law is even tabled, it has to get a certificate of financial implication. Government commits this is how I'm going to make sure this law is implemented. A lot of times, that commitment is just on paper. It does not really go forward. And if you look at the national budgets that we have just passed, I think in many African countries, if you look at the allocation on technology, it is very minimal, meaning that we have good laws, but there is lack of political will in terms of implementation. So how do we take the good laws that we have and make sure that they're implemented? And engaging the technologies, because they need to be part of these conversations. Otherwise, they are going to develop very good tools, but they are not applicable. A simple example that I can share now is the auto-captioning. Many of us use auto-captioning, especially for our PowerPoint presentations. Unfortunately, the language in which these algorithms have been trained is probably American English and then British English. If you bring a person like Timu from Busoga, the auto-captioning is most likely going to misunderstand and misrepresent many of my words that I speak. So it's a good technology, but it's been designed for somebody with an American accent. And so how would we bring these individuals together to make sure that I can be able to switch that, okay, I'm going to use auto-captioning, but I am using an African accent so that it is able to accurately capture my information. So same with people with disabilities and women. We need to find out how do these groups of people interact with technology, and then if you are designing the tools, but also making sure that the laws that we have speak the same language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Madam Rachel, it seemed like you had something to say.
No, I was just commenting in the chat section, but I do know that there's a question for me asking about the different AI tools that are used in the agricultural sector. So I'll be very honest with you, I don't know their names exactly. I just know what they do. And for example, I can just, in response to this question, I can just say that the different AI tools that are used in the agricultural sector that I have seen, at least here in Tanzania, they detects early symptoms or early showings of diseases in crops. Early symptoms, so it can detect that. I'm looking online for its name. I've just forgotten its name. So those tools can detect diseases in fruits and vegetables, and then yes, and then others look specifically at weather patterns. They look at different weather patterns to help the farmers know when's the best time to plant, harvest, and things like that. So I'm just looking online, and then I'll put it in the chat section. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. So in the absence of okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you short. So I just want to address two additional questions that came up briefly. One in respect of persons with neurodiverse disabilities, and as I said, persons with disabilities are not a homogeneous group, and therefore, as the AI systems are being trained or developed or designed, then they also need to take this into consideration. I have previously been involved in conversation where we actually ran to a conclusion that with respect to persons with disabilities, then the AI relies on a data desert. There's very limited information, sometimes because persons with disabilities are not involved in creating this. But as I mentioned, there are also some specific AI tools that are designed for specific types of disabilities, including people with neurodiverse disabilities. And one of the worries that comes up sometimes, and we could have this conversation, perhaps a conversation of another time, is we also put forward personal effort in training AI. So for instance, when I ask ChatGPT or any other tool, AI tool, a question, and it responds inaccurately, then sometimes we do train it. including specific to disability, you tell it this would be the preferred approach. But the worry that sometimes I have is this data that I'm feeding into these tools being considered as garbage by the people who, or the systems which might be sieving out the information that is relevant and that which is not relevant, as Paul mentioned earlier. And then secondly, in respect to the governance, developing policies, how do we make sure that we don't only do an abstract policy or framework that only mentions inclusion, mentions disability or gender, but does not have specific measures. So it's definitely important to be very deliberate, take very deliberate measures. And one of the challenges or the challenge that I would pose to people who influence these decisions or make these decisions is ask yourself, when you say inclusion or including persons with disabilities, what exactly do you mean? And when you answer that question, then you need to develop an implementation framework. And one of the best practice that I would cite, not just because I'm Kenyan, but because it has also been mentioned elsewhere, in respect to ICT products and services in general, Kenya is the only African country actually that has a standard developed by the Kenya Bureau of Standards on accessibility of ICT products and services. Then it means that developers and designers can no longer have the excuse of what do you mean making this website accessible. It's about time that the region in general, but also specific countries, take such deliberate measures to ensure that systems are inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all the speakers. We have learned a lot. Our notebooks are full. All right. So after this question and answers, the next part of this session is recommendations. And I know that the panelists in answering the questions have also made recommendations. However, if you have further recommendations,
S'il vous plaît.
if you have further recommendations, please.
Mema Bassi, il y a des questions qui m'ont été posées. Est-ce que je peux répondre?
Okay, please go on.
Ok. Alors, j'ai reçu deux questions. La première était celle de savoir si la substance du plan sur l'intelligence artificielle de la RDC vient en concurrence avec le code sur le numérique et comment est-ce que le plan va fonctionner. En fait, le plan national du numérique, ou soit la stratégie, c'est un plan qui vient s'inscrire sur l'éthique de l'intelligence artificielle adoptée par l'UNESCO. Vous vous rappelez, lorsqu'on était en train de parler on était en train de présenter les legal framework sur le plan international, nous avons parlé des recommandations de l'UNESCO. Et nous avons dit que sur le plan global, présentement, il y a une pression qui s'est fait. Donc, on est en train de recommander, de demander aux pays de se conformer, en fait, aux réglementations internationales sur l'intelligence artificielle. C'est dans ce sens-là que ce plan national du numérique a été mis en œuvre, parce que même en RDC, il a été mis en œuvre par l'appui de l'UNESCO. Alors, vous allez comprendre que ces plans ne sont pas vraiment des textes qui viennent
Well,
concurrencer
you will
les
bear with
éthiques
me
numériques.
that the
Et
AI
plutôt, ce sont
digital
des
uh,
instruments
the AI
qui viennent le compléter,
code
si je peux le dire
is
ainsi, parce
not
que le
coming
code
to
du numérique,
compete with the
lui,
digital blueprint, but it
c'est
comes to
lui va
complete,
fixer
because
les
the,
règles
the, the, the
générales, il
digital
fixe aussi
blueprint
les lois
is
et les
a
obligations.
law. It's a legal
Mais les
instrument that
plans,
lays down
ou bien les stratégies,
the
ce sont
rights,
des
the duties,
documents,
and
ce sont des
obligations.
documents
But the
stratégiques et
strategic plan
opérationnels
is an operational
qui viennent
document
traduire ces lois
for the use of AI, which
viennent
comes
traduire
to
ces lois
translate or to
en une
convert
direction ou
the
bien
laws into an
des
actionable
priori,
an actionable vision and bring to fruition the spirit of the law while expanding the development of the digital ecosystem and artificial intelligence in the DRC. This is to say that this is a strategy that has come in to supplement our legal arsenal and to make sure that it is more inclusive. It doesn't come to compete with the law on the use of digital systems. And the second question that was put to me related to what is the point that explains why we have many more women in the DRC than men, but we have less of those taking part in AI-related governance. Meanwhile, they could influence on the election of women and include them in decision-making spheres as relates to AI. Of course, we have many more women in the DRC than we have men, but
un manque de capacité, le fait pourrait de ne pas participer aux espaces de
but
gouvernance.
this is not an explanation. There is no. Remember, we're talking about obstacles, hurdles, consequences, and causes. And among the causes, we talked about structural and cultural causes, which can come into weigh on the fact that women are absent at the decision-making level. We also have a lack of access to information, a very low access to technological training and digital training by women. Of course, we have many, many more women than men, but you bear with me that right now, many more men have interest in pursuing studies or careers in the digital spectrum. And we can't say at the present time that there has not been an improvement. There is an improvement in the number of schooled girls and women, especially in the fields of the ICTs. But then we need to adopt a more proactive approach, which will come into systematically incorporate the gender aspects in education and training. Women also have to be raised awareness with, and we need to demystify all these stereotypes that hover around the fact that women should not have access to this or to that, because many of those come into cause women to retract from engaging in these spheres of learning. Although we have many more women now following studies in those domains, but women having been raised in an area where they are telling them that they don't have the right to follow or to do what men do. Well, I think that we need to improve mentalities. Women also themselves do not usually believe that some fields of study or of activity are meant for them. But we need to push forth with advocacy, raise awareness with the women, encourage them to follow whatever they want to do, and give them the capacity to do so, and even sit at the decision-making table. This will go a long way to cause a huge metamorphosis, and in the future we'll have many more women sitting at the decision-making table, taking the floor to defend women's rights, especially as relates to AI and the digital sphere. Thank you very much. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your response. It brought a lot of clarity. All right. Thank you for the responses to our questions, and thank you also for the recommendations that have been given. So finally, I'll be handing over to Fortunate. Thank you. Please, you can continue the proceedings from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mema Basri, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, Fortunate.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, thank you. So I will just briefly give the closing remarks. Before I do that, I want to thank everyone who has joined us today. A special thank you to our speakers who have shared their valuable insights, and also to the participants who joined us and actively engaged in this important conversation. I must say that today's dialogue has really been insightful for me, and I hope it has been for all the audience, by highlighting both the opportunities and the challenges that artificial intelligence presents itself, particularly when it comes to ensuring that emerging AI governance frameworks in Africa are both inclusive, gender responsive, and accessible to persons with disabilities. And also for the questions that our audience asked, it showed that they were engaging with the conversations and really interested in this conversation of artificial intelligence as it intersects with gender and persons with disabilities. So I think that at this point, someone commented that I hope this is not the first and last. I'd love to say that we hope that this is not going to be the first and last, because it has been engaging, it has been exciting. So this should be, as we move forward, be the beginning of very exciting conversations as we go forward in putting what we have discussed today into practice, and also looking at the legal frameworks, how we can also go ahead and make sure that no one is left behind when it comes to artificial intelligence and the other dimensions that it intersects with. So there's been a link that has been shared in the chat box. It's a very short questionnaire or survey that we kindly encourage you to take. It's just a few minutes. So we please kindly ask you to complete this short survey that is going to help us to also improve our future engagements and strengthen this ongoing dialogue. So before I close, I want to briefly talk about the Digital Rights Alliance Africa, DRAA, or the Alliance, which is a diverse Pan-African coalition of formal civil society organizations, human rights defenders, media practitioners, lawyers, and technology specialists in Africa. So this alliance seeks to champion digital civic space and counter threats to digital rights on the continent, on the African continent. And it was established in 2023 by the International Center for Non-Profit, the Center for Not-for-Profit Law, and the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, which is CIPESA, which we have collaborated with today. So this collaboration, it seeks to strengthen expertise and action by civil society in Africa to shape rights-based enabling digital policies and counter threats to digital rights and internet freedoms from the continent. This alliance is currently members across 13 countries in Africa, and these members do undertake research, legal advocacy, and share experiences to navigate digital restrictions and promote digital policy reforms in line with international norms. So I would really like to welcome you, if you are interested, to become part of this alliance. It will be very good initiative. So thank you very much on behalf of Palu and CIPESA. I would like to thank everyone who has joined today. We hope that this is going to be the beginning of very fruitful discussions going forward. So thank you very much once again to everyone. Please do have a good day, good morning from wherever you are joining us from. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, and goodbye, everyone.